I found my wife's secret collection of used boarding passes to my best friend's city. It started with a sock. Stupid, right? A single mismatched sock stuffed in the bottom of the laundry hamper like it was trying to hide. Sarah's socks are always perfectly paired, always folded with military precision. She's like that about everything, meticulously organized, almost pathologically so. Her side of the closet? A shrine to order. Her spice rack? Alphabetized. So this rogue sock, a faded gray one that didn't belong to any of her usual sets, felt like a glitch in the matrix. I tossed it aside, figured it was just a laundry day oversight, but it snagged at the edge of my awareness, a tiny pebble in my shoe. Look, before we dive any deeper into this whole mess, if this story is hitting you in any way, or if you just want to see how this whole twisted thing unravels, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. Smash the like button too, it really helps out. And if you've got thoughts or you've been through something similar, drop a comment below. Seriously, your stories and your insights mean a lot. Sharing this with someone who might need to hear it is always appreciated too. Okay, back to the sock. I don't know why I picked it up again. Maybe it was the sheer uncharacteristic sloppiness of it all, or maybe it was that little hum of unease that had been buzzing in the background of my life lately, a low-frequency thrum I'd been actively ignoring. It was a Tuesday night. Sarah was out with her book club, one of those things she insisted we both needed independent social lives for. I was slumped on the couch, the drone of a muted basketball game filling the silence, the lukewarm beer in my hand doing little to numb the creeping dissatisfaction that had settled in my gut over the past year. We'd been married for 8 years, 8 good years, I'd always thought, or at least the kind of good years that involved shared mortgages, planning vacations that never quite happened, and the comfortable, predictable rhythm of 2 lives intertwined. But lately, it felt off, like a well-worn sweater that had started to unravel at the seams, the threads thinning, the warmth seeping away. I pulled the sock out fully, and that's when I saw it. Tucked inside, rolled up tight, was a folded piece of paper. My heart did this weird little stutter step. Curiosity, that dangerous beast, nudged me. I carefully unrolled it. It was a boarding pass. Not just any boarding pass, though. It was for a flight from our local airport, O'Hare, to a city I didn't immediately recognize. The name on the ticket wasn't mine, and it wasn't Sarah's. It was Kevin Riley. Kevin, my best friend since kindergarten. The same Kevin who was supposed to be on a business trip to Denver this week, a trip I'd helped him prepare for, even gone over his presentation notes with him. The destination city wasn't Denver. It was Seattle. My hands started to tremble. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, washed over me. Why would Sarah have a boarding pass for Kevin, and why was it hidden inside a sock? This wasn't just a simple mix-up. This felt deliberate. I smoothed out the flimsy paper, my eyes scanning the details. The date was from last month, a flight I hadn't known about, a flight to Seattle. Kevin's wife, Brenda, had mentioned he was going to Seattle a few months back for some tech conference, but that was ages ago. What was going on? I felt a wave of nausea. My mind, usually so adept at compartmentalizing and rationalizing, was spinning out of control. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd picked it up by accident, thought it was hers, and then realized her mistake and just stuffed it somewhere. But the hiding part, the deliberate hiding inside a sock in the laundry hamper, that's what gnawed at me. Sarah wasn't the type to be forgetful, and she certainly wasn't the type to be sloppy. I stood up, my legs suddenly shaky, and walked over to the laundry room. The hamper was overflowing, a chaotic jumble of clothes. I started sifting through it, my movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Proof? An explanation? I pulled out t-shirts, jeans, towels, anything that might be concealing another clue. And then I found it. Tucked beneath a pile of gym clothes, another sock. This one a little thicker, a little more worn. Inside, another boarding pass. Same destination city, Seattle. Same passenger, Kevin Riley. Different date, also from last month. My breath hitched. This was no accident. This was a pattern. The sheer absurdity of it, the mundane hiding place, the intimate connection to Kevin, it was a trifecta of gut-wrenching betrayal. Kevin and I had been through everything together. We'd shared scraped knees on the playground, awkward teenage dances, the exhilaration of our first cars, the anxieties of college applications, the sober realities of our first real jobs. He was more than a friend. He was family. And Sarah? Sarah was the center of my universe, the woman I'd built my life around, the one I'd promised forever to. The thought of them together, of them doing things together that excluded me, that were hidden from me, was a physical blow. I sank back onto the couch, the boarding passes clutched in my hand, the worn paper feeling like shards of glass. The muted basketball game had stopped. The silence in the apartment was deafening, amplifying the frantic pounding of my own heart. I
I felt a surge of hot anger, quickly followed by a cold, hollow fear. This couldn't be happening. This was the stuff of bad movies, of soap operas, not my life. My life was ordinary, built on trust and routine, and the quiet understanding that comes with shared years. I thought back, replaying every interaction, every glance, every casual comment from the past few months. Sarah's sudden interest in girls' nights that stretched late, her vague explanations for longer absences, the way she'd sometimes get a faraway look in her eyes when Kevin's name came up, a look I dismissed as friendly reminiscing. Was I that oblivious, that stupidly trusting? The self-recrimination was a bitter pill. I felt like an idiot, a fool who'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and the curtain had just been ripped away. I needed more. I couldn't sit here and let my imagination run wild, filling in the blanks with the worst possible scenarios. My mind was already conjuring images, scenarios I couldn't unsee. I stood up again, my purpose hardening. I went to our bedroom, my sanctuary, the place where Sarah slept, where we'd shared our deepest intimacies. I started looking, not with the frantic desperation of the laundry room, but with a cold, methodical focus. Her dresser, her closet, the top drawers, the bottom drawers. I pulled out sweaters, scarves, shoes. Her perfume sat on the vanity, its scent a mocking reminder of her presence. I opened her jewelry box, the familiar glint of gold and silver doing nothing to soothe my fraying nerves. And then I found it, tucked away in a small decorative box that usually held spare buttons and sewing supplies, a small, elegant clutch. It wasn't one she used often, it was reserved for special occasions. My hand trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst a few old loyalty cards and some loose change, were more boarding passes. Not just a few, a whole stack, all for flights to Seattle, all for Kevin Riley.
The dates spanned months, some recent, some older. There were hotel receipts too, small, discreet ones, tucked in with the passes, all from hotels in downtown Seattle. The air felt thick, suffocating. Each pass was a nail in the coffin of my perceived reality. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, a drunken indiscretion. This was a sustained, secret life. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming, a testament to a level of deception I hadn't thought Sarah capable of. My chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. I felt a profound sense of violation, as if someone had broken into my very soul and rearranged the furniture. My eyes landed on a small, leather-bound notebook peeking out from the bottom of the clutch. My heart sank further. This was it. The confession. The detailed record. I pulled it out. The cover was plain, unadorned. I opened it, my hands shaking so violently that the pages fluttered. The handwriting was Sarah's, neat and familiar, but the words were a foreign language, a language of betrayal and secret desire. The first entry was dated almost a year ago. It spoke of a chance encounter at a conference, a spark, a shared conversation that went on too long. Then it spoke of furtive emails, of whispered phone calls, of meeting up when I was out of town on business trips I'd always thought were tedious but necessary. She wrote about the guilt, the thrill, the complicated emotions she felt. She wrote about Kevin, not as my best friend, but as her confidant, her lover. The words were raw, unfiltered, a diary of her secret life. She detailed trips they'd taken together, weekends they'd spent in that faraway city, away from my knowing eyes. There were descriptions of hotel rooms, stolen moments, and declarations of feelings that made my stomach churn. I kept reading, each word a fresh stab. She wrote about how much she loved me, how she didn't want to hurt me, how she felt trapped between two worlds. It was the ultimate paradox, claiming to love me while systematically dismantling our entire existence. The sheer audacity of it, the careful planning, the lies layered upon lies, was almost impressive in its awfulness. I slammed the notebook shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, not yet. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage. The carefully constructed edifice of my life, the comfortable stability, the unwavering trust I'd placed in the woman I loved, had been reduced to rubble. I looked at our wedding photo on the dresser, the smiling faces, the hopeful promises. It all felt like a cruel joke. I felt a primal urge to smash something, to break free from this suffocating reality. But then, a different emotion, a colder, more calculating one, began to surface. It was the instinct for survival. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I couldn't fall apart. Not now. I had to understand. I had to know everything. I carefully placed the notebook, the boarding passes, and the receipts back into the clutch, then put them back in the decorative box, just as I'd found them. A strange calm, born of shock and a dawning, terrible clarity, settled over me. I straightened my shirt, smoothed my hair, and walked out of the bedroom, leaving the wreckage behind me for a moment, but carrying its weight in my bones. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a stiff drink, neat. The amber liquid burned its way down my throat, but it did nothing to quench the fire raging inside. I stood there, looking out the window at the dark, indifferent Chicago skyline, the city lights glittering like mocking shards of glass. The silence was still there, but now it felt pregnant with unspoken truths, with the ghosts of stolen moments. The sock. It all started with a single misplaced sock, and now my entire world had come undone. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The question wasn't if I would confront her, but when, and how I would possibly navigate the fallout of this catastrophic revelation. The night stretched ahead, an abyss of uncertainty, and I was standing at the precipice, staring into the void. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. Sarah's book club. Still. She texted an hour ago. Running late, girls are chatting up a storm about literary symbolism or something. Don't wait up. Literary symbolism. The irony was so thick, it was practically a physical presence in the room, a third party breathing down my neck. I'd spent the last few hours meticulously piecing together a story in my head, a narrative that felt both impossibly real and utterly fantastical. I'd rehearsed it a dozen times, each iteration more painful than the last. Anger, cold and sharp, was my primary weapon now, a shield against the crushing weight of devastation. But beneath the anger, a tremor of something else, something fragile and terrifying, was starting to emerge. A desperate need to understand how we'd gotten here. I walked over to the bookshelf in the living room, my fingers tracing the spines of books we'd bought together, read together, or at least I'd assumed we had. The Great Gatsby. Sarah had loved that one. Such a tragic tale of obsession and illusion, she'd said. I could almost hear her voice, the melodic lilt I'd found so captivating. Illusion. That word again. My illusion. My Gatsby. I pulled out a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. She'd dog-eared pages in here too, notes scribbled in the margins, little hearts next to Mr. Darcy's more stoic pronouncements. I flipped through it, my gaze snagging on a familiar handwriting in the back end paper. It wasn't Sarah's. It was Kevin's. A short, scrawled message. Sarah, always remember our Seattle serenade. The city lights were our witness. Forever yours, K. Seattle serenade. My stomach lurched. I wanted to tear the page out, to rip it to shreds, but a strange, morbid fascination held me captive. I let my fingers drift across the ink, the ghost of his touch on the paper. It felt like an invasion, a violation of the sacred space of our shared life. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, the apartment suddenly feeling claustrophobic, saturated with the scent of her perfume and the lingering echo of lies. I drove, aimlessly at first, the familiar streets of Chicago blurring into a monotonous ribbon of light and shadow. I found myself heading towards the lakefront, the vast expanse of Lake Michigan stretching out before me like an unblinking eye. I parked the car and got out, the cool night air a balm on my overheated skin. I walked along the paved path, the rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore, a counterpoint to the turmoil in my head. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Kevin's contact. What would I say? Hey man, how's Brenda? Oh, and by the way, my wife's been having a secret affair with you, and I found her collection of used boarding passes to Seattle. Just checking in. The absurdity of it all made me want to laugh, a harsh, mirthless sound that caught in my throat. He was my best friend. We'd been through the trenches together. College loans, bad breakups, career anxieties, weddings. Brenda, his wife, was my friend too. They had 2 kids, 2 innocent children, who were now unknowingly part of this grotesque charade. The thought of their faces, their laughter, twisted something inside me.
I scrolled through my photos, searching for a picture of Kevin and me, a reminder of the uncomplicated loyalty that had once defined our friendship. I found one from a Cubs game a few years back, us grinning, beers in hand, the stadium roaring around us. He looked so genuinely happy, so oblivious. Or maybe he wasn't oblivious at all. Maybe he'd been playing me, playing all of us for a fool all along. The thought was a fresh wave of poison. I thought about Sarah, the woman I'd loved with every fiber of my being, the one I'd envisioned growing old with. Had it all been a lie? Every shared laugh, every intimate moment, every promise whispered in the dark? The notebook, the detailed accounts of their secret rendezvous, it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She'd written about him being her escape, her true connection. My connection then, what was that? A convenience, a comfort, a cover? I felt a profound sense of emptiness, a void where my trust in her had once resided. I pulled out one of the boarding passes from my wallet, a habit I developed in the last few hours, as if holding the tangible proof could somehow make it less real or more real, I wasn't sure. Seattle, a city I'd only ever seen on a map or in movies. Now it was etched into my mind as the backdrop to my own personal apocalypse. She detailed trips to Pike Place Market, to the Space Needle, places I'd never experienced with her. They were their memories, their moments, built on a foundation of deceit. A car pulled up beside mine on the lakefront path. The headlights swept across my face. It was Sarah's car. My heart leaped into my throat. She was back. I quickly shoved the boarding pass back into my wallet, my movements jerky and urgent. I stood up, my legs suddenly heavy, rooted to the spot. Her car door opened and she stepped out, looking beautiful, radiant even, as always. Her blonde hair caught the streetlights and she smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Hey you," she said, her voice soft. "I thought I might find you here." My breath hitched. The rehearsed accusations, the torrent of angry questions, all of it evaporated, replaced by a suffocating silence. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing before me with the words I'd read in that notebook. The woman who professed to love me, who slept beside me every night, and the woman who was meticulously building a secret life with my best friend. She walked towards me, her steps light. "Everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. She reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. The touch sent a jolt through me, a confusing mix of revulsion and the ingrained reflex of comfort. I flinched, almost imperceptibly, but she noticed. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice now tinged with concern, laced with something else, anxiety. I finally found my voice, but it was a hollow echo of my own. "Strange," I managed, the word tasting like ash. "Yeah, you could say that." She tilted her head, her eyes searching mine. "What happened?" I couldn't do it. Not here, not like this. The anger was a roaring inferno, but the raw, gaping wound of betrayal was too exposed. I looked out at the dark water, the city lights reflecting on its surface like scattered diamonds. "Nothing," I said, my voice flat. "Just thinking." She stepped closer, her hand resting on my chest, right over my heart. "You're my husband," she murmured, her gaze steady. "You can tell me anything. We can face anything together." The words, intended to be comforting, landed like a cruel mockery. We, together. The fundamental lie of it all was almost unbearable. I looked down at her hand, at the familiar wedding band on her finger, the same one I wore. 2 rings, 2 lives, and 1 massive deception. "Can we?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Of course we can," she said, her tone firm, a forced assurance. "What is it, honey? Is it work?" Brenda called. Was she upset about Kevin's trip? She was fishing, trying to steer me away from whatever was clearly gnawing at me. I pulled away gently, stepping back. "No, it's not work. And Brenda's fine." I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see past the familiar features, past the loving wife persona, and find the woman who'd been living this double life. "Sarah," I began, my voice low and deliberate, "have you ever met anyone in Seattle recently?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. Her eyes flickered away for a split second, a tell I would have missed a week ago, but now it screamed. Her smile tightened, becoming almost brittle. "Seattle? Why Seattle?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too casual. "No, I haven't been to Seattle in ages, not since that conference Brenda mentioned ages ago." It was a lie, a blatant, easily disproven lie. The carefully constructed composure she'd maintained at the apartment was starting to crack. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the hunter's instinct taking over.
I knew she was lying, and I knew exactly how to prove it. "Really?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Because I found something that suggested otherwise." I reached into my wallet, my hand shaking slightly, and pulled out one of the boarding passes. I held it up, the faint glow of the streetlights illuminating the details. "This," I said, my gaze locked on hers, "is a boarding pass for a flight to Seattle last month for Kevin Riley." Her face drained of color. Her eyes widened, darting from the boarding pass to my face, then back again. The carefully constructed mask crumbled, revealing raw fear and panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "And this," I continued, my voice gaining an edge, pulling out another pass, then another, fanning them out between my fingers. And this, all for Kevin, all to Seattle, for months. And then there's this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small leather-bound notebook. I held it up, the familiar weight of it in my hand feeling heavier than a ton of bricks. "Your little diary, your secret confession, full of Seattle serenades and true connections." Her eyes welled up, tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. She looked utterly devastated, cornered, exposed. She took a step back, as if the very air between us had become toxic. "You went through my things," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You hid them in a sock, Sarah," I said, the rage finally boiling over, raw and guttural. "In the laundry hamper, like a guilty child. You lied to me, you lied to Brenda, you lied to Kevin, and you did it all while telling me you loved me." My voice cracked. "While letting me believe we were building a life together." She sang onto the hood of her car, her shoulders shaking. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to explain. The silence, once a suffocating shroud, was now accusation. The confession was out, but the damage was immeasurable. I looked at her, the stranger who wore the face of my wife, and I felt nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. A wound that felt impossibly deep. I had the proof. I had the confessions.
But what I didn't have was any understanding of how to move forward, how to possibly salvage anything from the wreckage of our lives. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating. I turned away from her, from the broken woman on the hood of her car, and stared out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the lake. The city lights no longer sparkled. They just blinked, indifferent to the implosion of my world. I was standing at the edge of an abyss, and the only thing I could feel was the cold, hard reality of what had been done, and the terrifying uncertainty of what was yet to come. The vast, indifferent expanse of the lake. The city lights no longer sparkled. They just blinked, indifferent to the implosion of my world. I was standing at the edge of an abyss, and the only thing I could feel was the cold, hard reality of what had been done, and the terrifying uncertainty of what was yet to come. She was still there, huddled on the car, a small, broken figure against the backdrop of the indifferent city. I could hear her soft, ragged breaths, the hitching sobs that tore through the quiet night. They were sounds I'd once associated with comfort, with vulnerability, with the intimate sharing of a life. Now, they were just another layer of the pain, another reminder of the depths of her deception. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My gaze was fixed on the dark, choppy surface of Lake Michigan, the same water that had witnessed countless moments of joy, of shared dreams, of a future I'd believed was as solid as the concrete beneath my feet. Now, it felt like a mirror reflecting a shattered reality, a distorted image of the life I thought I knew. The carefully constructed narrative of our marriage had imploded, leaving behind a rubble of broken trust and unanswered questions. How long? How long had this been going on? The notebook, with its meticulous entries, suggested months, maybe even years. Years of shared meals, of whispered I love yous before sleep, of making plans, of building a home, all while she was living a parallel life, a secret existence with my best friend. The anger that had fueled me earlier, the sharp, cleansing rage, had started to recede,
replaced by a hollow ache that settled deep in my bones. It wasn't the anger of righteous indignation anymore. It was the dull throb of profound, debilitating loss. It was the realization that the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd committed my life to, was a stranger, a carefully crafted illusion. And the man I'd called my brother, my confidant, the guy who'd stood beside me at my wedding, was a viper. I thought of Brenda, her bright, open face, her easy laugh, the way she'd always included me in their family gatherings, treating me like an honorary member. Did she know? Did she suspect? The thought made me sick. The innocence of their children, too. Little Leo with his gap-toothed grin, and Maya with her wild curls. They were collateral damage in this mess, victims of their parents' betrayal. I wondered if Kevin had ever looked at me, at Brenda, at their kids, and felt anything but the thrill of his clandestine escapades. Had he ever felt guilt? Shame? Or was he, like her, just better at compartmentalizing, at separating the different facets of his life? The cool breeze off the lake did little to temper the heat rising within me. It wasn't the heat of passion or desire. It was the suffocating heat of realizing you'd been played, systematically and ruthlessly, by the two people you trusted most in the world. I pulled out my phone again, my thumb scrolling through contacts, my finger pausing over Kevin's name. I didn't call him. I couldn't bring myself to engage with him, not yet. The words I'd want to say would be laced with so much venom, so much raw, unadulterated loathing, that I feared I might not be able to stop myself from saying something I'd regret. Though, what could I possibly regret more than the entire past year? I scrolled through photos of us, of Kevin and me. A dozen pictures from that Rockies trip a few summers ago. Us in hiking gear, beaming at the camera, the majestic peaks of the Rockies behind us. Another of us at a bachelor party, shirts off, laughing hysterically. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else, to a different version of myself, a naive fool who believed in the unshakable bonds of male friendship. That friendship, like everything else, was a lie, a carefully orchestrated performance. I looked back at Sarah. She had finally pushed herself up, leaning against the car, her shoulders slumped. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked utterly defeated. And in that moment, a flicker of something other than rage or despair pierced through the fog of my emotions. A ghost of the love I'd felt for her, twisted and tainted, but still there, a persistent phantom. It was a confusing, agonizing sensation. How could the same woman who had shattered me into a million pieces have once been the center of my universe? I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice raspy, barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. The words hung in the air, a weak attempt at an explanation that felt pathetically inadequate. You didn't mean for this to happen? I repeated, turning to face her, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah, this wasn't an accident. This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to lie to me every single day. You chose to build a life with me while you were building another one with Kevin. You chose to betray everything we had. She flinched at my words, her gaze dropping to the pavement. It started slowly. It was just talking at first, and then it just escalated. Escalated, I echoed, the word tasting like bile. Escalated into clandestine meetings, into secret trips, into writing about him like he was some kind of savior? While I was here loving you, working to build our future, you were escaping into his arms? My voice rose with each word, the pain clawing its way up my throat. What was I, Sarah? Just a placeholder? A convenience? A way to maintain appearances while you lived your real life with him? She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face again. No, you were never that. I love you. I do. I always have. The declaration was a cruel irony, a twisted paradox that threatened to break me all over again. You love me? I scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. How can you say that? How can you look me in the eye and say you love me after this? Love isn't a switch you can just turn on and off, Sarah. It's built on honesty, on trust, on commitment, and you've destroyed all of it. I walked away from her again, pacing the path like a caged animal. The cool air no longer felt refreshing. It felt sharp and unforgiving. I needed to get out of here. I needed to put distance between myself and this entire sordid mess. I got into my car, the familiar interior now feeling foreign and tainted. The scent of her perfume, which I'd once found intoxicating, now felt suffocating. I started the engine, the rumble, a low, guttural sound that mirrored the turmoil in my gut. As I pulled away, I saw her standing there, silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlights, a solitary figure in the vast emptiness of the lakefront. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me go, a monument to broken vows and shattered dreams.
I drove through the deserted streets of Chicago, the city that had always felt like home, now a maze of painful memories. Every corner, every landmark was a reminder of a moment shared, a promise made, a future imagined. The drive felt endless, a purgatory of my own making. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the apartment, not tonight. I couldn't face the silence, the emptiness, the ghost of our life together. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you only ended up at when everything else had fallen apart. The room was sparse, impersonal, smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke and disinfectant. I paid in cash, avoiding the clerk's eyes. I just wanted to disappear for a while, to retreat from the world and try to piece together the fragments of myself that had been so brutally scattered. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the thin blanket pulled tight around my shoulders. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't try to distract myself. I just sat there in the suffocating quiet and let the emotions wash over me. The anger, the confusion, the overwhelming sadness. I thought about Kevin, about Brenda, about their children. I thought about Sarah, about the woman I'd married, about the woman I thought I knew. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical wound, a gaping chasm where my heart used to be. I pulled out the notebook again, my fingers tracing the embossed cover. I opened it to a random page. Her handwriting, so familiar, so intimate, filled the lines. She wrote about the thrill of their stolen moments, the guilt that gnawed at her, the fear of discovery. But interspersed with the confession were words of love for me, contradictory declarations of affection that made my head spin. "I love him so much," she'd written, referring to me. "But Kevin, he's a fire. He ignites something in me that I can't explain. It's wrong, I know it's wrong, but I can't seem to stop." It was the confusion, the contradiction, that was the hardest to bear. She loved me. She also loved Kevin. How could both be true? Or was it that she loved a version of me, a version of us that was safe and predictable, while Kevin offered the forbidden thrill, the dangerous escape? I closed the notebook, the leather feeling cold against my skin. The answers, if they existed, were buried deep within her, in the labyrinth of her desires and her deceptions. Hours passed. The motel room, once just a place to escape, became a crucible. I sat there, wrestling with the wreckage, with the sheer, unadulterated pain of it all. There were no easy answers, no grand pronouncements, just the stark, brutal reality of what had happened. Eventually, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky a bruised purple, a subtle shift occurred. The raw edges of my pain began to soften, not into acceptance, but into a weary resignation. The storm of emotions hadn't passed, but it had reached its peak, and I was left stranded in the aftermath. I looked at my reflection in the grimy mirror above the dresser. My eyes were hollow, my face etched with exhaustion and a sorrow that felt ancient. I looked like I had aged 10 years in a single night. I knew I couldn't stay in this motel room forever. I had to face it. I had to face the fallout, the consequences, the shattered pieces of my life. But for now, in this quiet, anonymous space, I just needed to breathe, to acknowledge the depth of the wound without trying to immediately fix it. The tears that had threatened to consume me finally found their release, not in heaving sobs, but in a quiet, steady flow. Tears of grief, of loss, of the profound, aching sadness of a love story that had been irretrievably rewritten by betrayal. The world outside the motel room was waking up,
oblivious to the implosion that had occurred within the confines of this small, dingy space. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the parking lot. It was a new day, but it felt like the end of an era, the end of a life I'd meticulously built. I stood up, my muscles stiff and protesting. I walked to the window, looking out at the ordinary world, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, nothing would ever be the same again. The path forward was uncertain, shrouded in a fog of pain and disappointment. But as I took a deep, shaky breath, I also felt a sliver of something else, a grim, hard-won resolve. The love was gone, replaced by a scar, but I would survive this. I had to. The last exhale of someone who had just survived the demolition of their world.